Thank you so much for joining us today, Astrid.
Thank you so much for having me, Valerie. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited about this book. Okay, there's so much to talk about, but let's just start off with League of Liars. For those people who haven't got their copy yet, and they should, what's it about?
So, League of Liars is a young adult fantasy crime mashup. It's set in a world where magic can be lured from any shadow to alter time. It features a 17-year-old legal apprentice who is going to spend his summer studying the other side of the law before he wants to become a prosecutor eventually. And during this apprenticeship, he meets three teenage criminals who have very complicated stories. And despite the overwhelming evidence against them, starts to find himself siding with these criminals and questioning everything that he knew about the law and the magic system itself.
All right, so there's mystery, there's drama, there is obviously fantasy. I just want to touch on the fantasy aspect because, as you say, it's about, it involves certain elements of magic that in this world people can harness if they choose to.
Right.
And it's a kind of unique kind of magic. I don't think it's a spoiler if we mention what it is because it's right there at the beginning of the book, right? But maybe you would probably do it more justice if you explain the kind of magic that they can harness, because I think it's really intriguing. And then I have further questions on that. So perhaps you could just explain that with the shadows and everything.
Yeah, sure. So it's accessible through any shadow, any dark shadow. And I wanted a magic system that was so easily ready to use for the people who live there. But the consequences of using the magic is so unpredictable. So you can essentially bend it to your will and it to bring you certain things or change your reality or change time. But what actually happens when the magic tries to do your bidding is very unpredictable and often deadly. So therefore, this magic is illegal. And there is this prison, Vardian, which is where a lot of the novel takes place, for anyone who does use magic or even attempts to use magic.
Okay, so it's a pretty unique kind of premise and it's absolutely fascinating. And as it was unfolding, I was thinking, how did she think that? How did that come into her brain? So how did you start determining what kind of magic it would be? Because it's not like your traditional spells and stuff.
Right.
How did you determine what kind of magic it would be, and then the world that could be built around it? What was the spark?
Yeah, that's a good question. And sometimes it's really easy to spot like the spark of inspiration. I know with Four Dead Queens, it was a dream that kind of started the building of that world. And for League of Liars, it's not as clear for me because it was a bit of a process of putting together different ideas. Like I knew I wanted to write my take on a true crime documentary. Like I love things like The Staircase, The Jinx, Making a Murderer, where you're getting drip fed pieces of information and trying to put it together. And you're never really sure, well, do I believe them? Do I not? Like, what is actually going on here? So I wanted to do that, but in a fantasy setting. So I knew I wanted the magic to be illegal. And I wanted it to be that anyone could do it. Whereas in a lot of magic systems, you either train to become a magician or a wizard, or, as you mentioned, spells, that there is some kind of knowledge gain. But this is something that anyone can do. And so anyone is capable of using it, and therefore anyone is capable of being then imprisoned for using it. And I needed something, therefore, that could be tapped in at any time. So I was thinking about, well, what sort of circumstances or settings, like, can it come from water? Is it just in the atmosphere? Like, what is it itself that you can draw this magic from? And I can't remember exactly how I came up with the idea of shadows, but that is something that's, when there's light, there is darkness. So there is this idea of, in the darkness, there's something that can be used to hopefully improve the person standing, but it can then have these disastrous consequences. And I needed that balance, that light and shade, because I wanted it to be such a such an unpredictable form of magic that you really can't risk people using it, and therefore you would have to rely on the legal system and just the presence of this prison that is so visible on the horizon, like coming out of the water, this ghastly prison that you would not want to use it, even though it's always, the magic's always there.
Okay, fantastic. So to give people some context, this is your third novel now.
Yes.
Now, your your first one, as you mentioned, was Four Dead Queens, and then you did The Vanishing Deep, and now this is your third one. So, and we have interviewed you before in the podcast. So, if people want to hear your origin story, we'll make sure you go and listen to that particular episode. But can you tell us, after, just to get as a bit of a catch up, after you released Four Dead Queens, at one point, because your debut novel is a pretty significant thing, but there's also a level of uncertainty as to, is this my career or not, right? After your third novel, it's a bit different. But after Four Dead Queens was released, when did you kind of think, this is it, this is going to be, I know for sure this is my path now?
I think I probably knew before Four Dead Queens. So
wow.
It was probably more an ambitious goal and idea that this is what I want to do. I mean, I've always wanted to write stories ever since I could read and write. That was something that I wanted to do and something that I was attracted to, and especially fantasy. And I tried for many years, as you mentioned, there is my origin story, but many years to try and get published. And so my goal was always, once I get in, can get my foot in the door, hopefully they can't get rid of me and I can tell many, many stories. So yeah, it certainly was solidified with releasing my first book and just loving, I wasn't sure what it was to be an author. I knew what it was to write a book and then submit it to a publisher and revise, but then kind of what happens and what's expected of you, that part of it I wasn't sure of because I hadn't gone through the process. But once I did, and I was able to connect with readers at different events, and I just was blown away by it's such a solo, insular activity, writing, but once you put it out in the world, it's such a community that you become a part of. And I loved that part so much that I was like, I have to keep writing and keep releasing books as long as I can.
Oh, I love it. So the thing is, this is you write YA, young adult, but a lot of adults read young adult. But you mentioned, connecting with readers and that sort of thing. I imagine that there are a lot of young adult fans who connect with you on all different types of platforms. What kind of relationship and feedback and level of frequency do they contact you?
Daily. So
wow.
It's amazing. And it's been 3 years since Four Dead Queens came out, and to this week actually. So it's really incredible to still be tagged in posts, reviews, people reaching out asking for sequels. That's something I get a lot for Four Dead Queens, and have also been getting for League of Liars already, which is amazing because the book is just coming out. And so it is a daily interaction, which it's very validating in a way that, you do put the book out in the world, and then you sit at home and you hope people are reading it, but you don't know. And then to have people say, oh yeah, I'm reading it, I'm loving it, or this is my favorite character, or I've created some artwork based on this scene that I love so much. It's just, it makes it all worthwhile, all the long hours and the hard work. And
oh, how fantastic. So I understand that it could certainly be validating, but in terms of your interactions with them and the feedback that they give you, has any of their feedback ever impacted some of your creative decisions? Like, I was going to kill that character, but now I'm not, or, something like that.
Yeah, it does. I think I didn't have that experience with Four Dead Queens or The Vanishing Deep, because I actually had written both. Well, obviously wrote Four Dead Queens before it came out, but I'd written The Vanishing Deep before Four Dead Queens had been published, because there was a 2-year gap between the publishing deal and the release of the book. So I had this this kind of vacuum where I could just write whatever I wanted with no expectations. No one knew me yet. And I just wrote 2 books that I wanted to tell the stories of, and I love the characters and the worlds. And then book 3 was such a different experience because I had gotten so much feedback from Four Dead Queens at that time. The Vanishing Deep hadn't quite come out yet. And that's when I really started to think, okay, well, they really responded well to this. And maybe, you know, they didn't pick up on that, which I thought was going to be a bigger moment or something like that. So that's when I did really think about, okay, what am I going to write next? And I actually wrote 2 manuscripts. They were incomplete, but one was at 50,000 words before I then wrote League of Liars. And I decided that League of Liars would be the next best book to release at that time. So that came from the sort of feedback that I was getting from my readers and what they were enjoying, and feeling like, okay, this makes sense as the next book to follow up what I'd released in the past.
So with League of Liars, can you give us a bit of a timeline? So when the idea came into your head, how long you spent on the first draft, and, you know, the subsequent iterations after that?
Yeah, so I took 6 months off from work. So I work in film and TV production, and I was traveling around a lot for touring for Four Dead Queens, and I had a lot of events. And I thought, look, I'm going to take the time off, focus on the book, and also write my next one. So it was 2019, and I wrote the first draft of League of Liars in 6 weeks, which is
what?
a very short amount of time, I'll admit.
No. Really?
Yeah,
Hang on. How many words in your first draft?
Well, the first draft was about 82,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how did this happen? Did you already have the story in your head and it just needed to pour out of you? Or were you actually discovering the story as you were writing? How's it possible to have written it in 6 weeks? And was it like 9 to 5? Like, what kind of hours were you doing?
I was trying to do very much 9 to 5, like taking it as like a day job, you know. So I had put my other day job aside, and this, I was going to write kind of 9 to 5, 9 to 6 hours. And I discovered that you can attempt to do that, but really out of that time, which is quite a long time to be creative and in your process for 8 hours straight, I would only maybe get 3 to 4 good hours of writing a day. So I had the idea, and I think I had written maybe a chapter or so, but I'm a pantser, so I didn't know what was going to happen. I hadn't plotted it out, and I didn't know my characters yet. I just knew I wanted it to be set in a prison. I wanted it to be courtroom drama, but magic. And I didn't know what would happen. And I just sat down every day and tried to write as much as possible. And at least... well, usually when I'm working full-time, I try to write at least 1,000 words a day. But now that I was writing full-time, I tried to write at least 5,000 words a day. So yeah, I just sat down every day and write as much as I could.
Wow. So let's say, did you just say 5,000 words a day?
Yes.
That's amazing. So let's say you
get... I should preface that, like... They're very rough words.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. But let's say you get to your 5,000, you know, do you actually have more in you, but then you force yourself to stop in case, you know, you've run out of juice or something? Like, because if you get to 5,000, it's like, well, why not get to 6,000, you know?
I usually, if I'm on a roll, I'll keep going, but usually I'm kind of at my limit at that point. Sometimes I'll jot down some ideas for the next time I sit down, or I'll do like a what if and just do a list of all different things that I think might happen. And then that will spark some more for the next day to keep going. But yeah, it is not normally how I write books. And it was the first time that I did it that way. And I should also say that first draft is very, very different to the published novel.
Sure.
So much more work went into the revisions.
Okay, so we'll get to that. I want to ask you about the revisions, but when you're sitting down thinking, I'm going to write now, I've got this idea, it's going to pour out of my brain, you're not writing about the real world. You're writing about this fantasy world, which has its own rules, its own environment, its own geography, its own borders, its own everything. What do you need to do to step into that world so that you are then writing it authentically?
I think it's a process of revisions. I think like the initial sketch of the world is just that. It is a rough sketch. I know that there's going to be magic, and I know there's going to be a prison, and I want it to be visible. So it kind of has to be over there. And I want it to be, I don't want technology. Technology is really difficult in fantasy to pull off because it often gets in the way, like mobile phones. You know, how many times in movies and TV shows do you not have cell service? Because if you did, it would just, the plot would fall apart. So
yes.
I knew I wanted it to be a world that wasn't a specific era of our history, but that it did feel a little bit like the 19th century. Like there are a few kind of throwbacks to that. And yeah, I had this rough idea, and then I just kind of, as I go through revisions, start to fill in the sketch and work out bit by bit. And I usually just work out what you need to know chapter by chapter. So, and they say that that's the best way to build a world for a reader, is you only tell the reader what they need to know in that moment. So what do you need to know about the world in the first chapter is very different from what you need to know about the world by, you know, the 10th chapter and the 50th chapter.
So when did you give yourself 6 weeks, or did you just was it a 6-week deadline for you?
Yes, I wanted to finish it before I went back to my job.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah,
so
I wanted the first draft.
So you get to, week 5.5. By then, did you know what was going to happen at the end, or were you still discovering that? Or did you get to the stage of, oh, I'm panicked, I don't know what to do, I've got 3 days left?
No, usually around halfway, I've figured out how I want it to end. And again, the ending is very different in the book than that first draft. So I thought I knew how it was going to end, and that ended up being completely different. So yeah, I usually work out as I'm going along. It's I've heard the analogy, I think Jay Kristoff, I've heard him say, it's like when you're driving at night with a car, you can just, with the lights on, you can see a little bit ahead. You don't know really where you're going, but you see, bit by bit. And I very much agree with that analogy. And I see, as you write, things kind of unfurl out of that, and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then usually by halfway, I know where at least I want to end up. I might not know exactly how to get there, but I've got more than just darkness ahead.
Yeah, sure. And so let's talk about after the 6 weeks. What happened then? What did you do next?
So at that point, I wrote up a proposal, and because I had a 2-book deal with Penguin Random House in the US, and then they sold on to Allen and Unwin, which is where it's published in Australia and New Zealand. I had to sell a new book essentially to Penguin Random House. They had the first option. So I put together a proposal, and I think it was the first, I can't remember if I gave them the entire manuscript. It was at least a good chunk, like 50 pages, and then sent that to my editor. And then,
the first draft?
Yeah, of the first draft.
Okay. Yep, okay.
Yeah, and then once, so they bought that, I then sent the full draft over, and that's when we would start revisions. But that wasn't until 2020 that we started revisions.
So how long was the revising and editing process with your editors?
So that was about a year, but you don't work, for that entire year. It's 6 weeks here on a tight deadline, and then a few months waiting, and then you'll have the next revision come back, and you'll do a month of intense editing and revisions, and then it goes back. So it's hard to kind of put that all together. So I would say maybe 4 to 5 months across, a year and a half was roughly the revision.
Do you enjoy the editing process? Do you actually kind of, you do?
Yeah, it's my favorite part.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of people.
Why?
I don't know. I think because I don't plan. There's this this dread inside me that maybe I'm going to hit a point where I don't know where the story is going and I'll give up on it. And I did do that with the 2 other manuscripts. I was like, I don't think this is exactly what I should be writing. It's not really working. I'll shelve it and come back to it. So once that foundation is there, it doesn't matter how bad it is, because my first drafts are bad. I know that I have a story in there somewhere, and I just got to piece it together and find it. So yeah, the revision process is a lot more fun for me. It's more of fleshing out the characters and the logic of the world and magic and all that good stuff.
So what kinds of things does without necessarily going to specifics so we don't spoil anything, what kinds of things does the editor come back to you with that needs to change?
So the first draft, as I mentioned, was very different to the finished book. So certain things might be like, I'm not really understanding this character's motivation, or, we need to know a little bit more about why they're behaving this way, or it feels like the author is kind of leading these characters to do this thing because you need them to do that thing, rather than them coming to that kind of decision on their own or more organically. And so one of the things that I ended up doing, one of actually the main things for this book was the stakes. So what is at stake for Cater himself? Because he has a backstory where he lost his mother through the careless use of Edom. So that's why he believes so passionately that anyone who uses this extra dimensional magic should be locked away, to protect society. And I needed him to have, and it's very hard to talk about the book without giving too much away, but have an investment in these 3 criminals that he meets. And, what is that's going to make him really reconsider his entire life up until that point where he believed so much in the legal system. So that was something that came out through revisions, and I changed one character, which I can't really mention.
Okay.
I changed their entire backstory so that it helped Cater's motivation.
Right. So tell me why you love writing for young adults.
I love YA because I love reading it. So for me, it's not only what I love to write, but it's what I love to read. And there's just something so heartwarming and pure about teens being passionate about something. They love something with their whole heart. And I feel like we lose that a little bit as we get older. And being surrounded by a community that just like, they believe in these characters, they love them, and just this enthusiasm they have for fiction and for stories. And that's the same way that I am about stories. Like I think they're so important in our lives, and especially, for escapism, it's so important. And for empathy, like being able to read from different people's perspectives. And yeah, YA really is, it's not only a great community, but it is a category that allows you to really play with genre. And that's something I personally love to do. I love to blend different genres together, like crime, thrillers, and fantasy. It's not necessarily something you would think that you would want to read a courtroom drama about fantasy crime, but that's something that really appealed to me. And I feel like that's, YA allows you those liberties to just play with the genre and have fun. It really is like, it's a joyful form of storytelling. I think is probably the best way I can encapsulate it.
Now, you may or may not be able to answer this question, but but I want to ask you anyway. So in the book, there are kind of like 4 points. You write from different characters' points of view. There is the protagonist, Cater, who you write in first person, and that's straightforward because it's first person and it's his experience and all that. But you write in, limited, third person, limited focus, close focus with Princess Eleonora and Jay and Lita, I think. Now, point of view is something that some writers really, really struggle with when they are writing their novel, and it can be, very confusing, not only obviously for the reader, but for the writer to to really nail it. You kind of get it or you don't, right? You obviously you get it. Obviously you're a master at it. What do you recall any point where you struggled with it and what you did to kind of nail it?
Yeah.
Back in the day, back when you were.
I was talking about this morning in my launch with the US, where I previously always wrote first person and just one character, first person POV. And I had written many manuscripts, tried to get them published. And that was what I was used to. And also what I was familiar with reading them. And I had this idea for Four Dead Queens, and I knew I wanted to do something different. And I wanted to have the perspective of the queens in third and then the main character in first, because it was essentially her story. And I didn't know if I could do it. It was really a risk. It was the first time that I had tried to do it, the first time I'd ever written in third person. And I really enjoyed it, because for me, it was easier to get the different personalities of the queens across in third person than it would have been in first person, because you have a little bit more of an outside view of who the character is, how they behave, how they look. Whereas first person, you're very much, within their heads. So it's all based on how they think and feel. And obviously characters think and feel in different ways. But for me, it was easier to differentiate between the characters by doing third. And the same with League of Liars, I've done third because there's a lot of secrets and twists and turns in this book. And I needed that little bit of distance from the characters, that they couldn't be first person because they would reveal too much. And yeah, so I had to do the third person, a little bit more distance. And I also was then able to really look at, okay, well, not only what are these characters presenting to the world, which is very different from maybe what and they really believe or what it is that they want and what they desire. And so, yeah, I think for me, playing around with perspectives helped me find the characters' voices. And perhaps that isn't something that I would have been able to do if it was just in first person.
So when you first started doing, because you said you've always written first person, I'm curious to know, because some writers who have only ever written first person, but also want to, for various technical reasons or whatever, they don't want certain characters to know certain things. They want to write in third person. They actually write the characters in first person first and then change it.
Yeah, I've heard people do that, which sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay, so you didn't do that.
No.
Now, your books are very popular in the US and in Australia, both countries, but with the exception of obviously changing spelling and, things like that, are there any other changes that you're aware of that the publisher makes to the different books?
No, there haven't really been anything. I mean, because I first write for the US, because Penguin, they then sell it on to Allen and Untitled. So that those first edits and revisions that I'm doing are with the US. I kind of have to put my head in the US mindset. And one of the early discussions that we had was what term you would use for an apprentice. Like we were discussing, are they a trainee? Are they an intern? And there's things that we use here that in the US they don't. So they don't translate. So I had to kind of figure out, okay, well, what kind of makes sense in this world, but also it's not, this world isn't the US, it's a fantasy world. So there are a few things like that come up, but most of the time it is purely spelling.
Yes. So take us back to just very briefly, because we know that there is your origin story in the other episode, but just take us back briefly to how you got the US deal for your first book.
Sure. So yeah, I'd been trying to get published for, I think it was 4 years at that point, with 2 different manuscripts. And I heard about Pitch Wars, which is an online competition where you enter to win a mentor and they help you polish up your manuscript to go online for a showcase where agents request material and then hopefully you sign through them. And I thought, well, this is a great deadline. I will thrive on deadlines. So I thought I want to get my manuscript ready for the Pitch Wars competition, which was a little ambitious because I hadn't started it in March and it was due in August. And I managed to do a pretty rough first draft of Four Dead Queens, and I got into the competition. And then I think it was like 250 words. It wasn't a lot, and a little pitch went online in November that year. So this was 2016. And yeah, I signed with an agent a week later. So it was very quick. And this is one of the things about Pitch Wars is it does speed up the entire process.
So hang on, you signed with an agent as a result of going into Pitch Wars?
Yeah. So they will have hundreds of agents that will look up all the different applications, all the submissions, and then they will say, oh, well, the full manuscript, you send it to them, and then they'll decide if they want to represent you. So it gave me the exposure. I could query, and I did still query a few different agents with the manuscript once I'd gone through Pitch Wars, which was a month of polishing and rewriting the manuscript. But I ended up, getting it through one of the agents who wrote on my submission, said they wanted to read more. And then we did.
And it's a US agent.
Yes. In New York, where a lot of the industry still is.
Yes.
Who knows, that might change now that, it's more virtual. And then, we did a light round of revisions. And in the new year, in January 2017, I went out on submissions, which is when your agent sends to all the publishers, it's a bit of a different process here. In Australia, you can go directly to publishers, yes, but in the US, you need an agent. And I was very lucky. It was really quick. I was one of the first manuscripts that my editor had read in the new year. And then they offered, so that's Putnam at Penguin Random House. And that was, a very kind of short version of how it happened, and certainly a lot quicker than my previous attempts, which was, sending out a manuscript to an agent or hundreds of agents and getting hundreds of rejections and then trying again with another manuscript.
Moral of the story is enter competitions and be persistent.
Be persistent, definitely. And one of the things I learned was know when to give up on something, which sounds really hard. And it is hard in the moment because you believe in something so much. Like I believed that first manuscript I wrote was going to be published. It was going to become a movie. It was going to be all the things. And it didn't do anything. It was a great way to learn about the publishing process and the journey of getting an agent. And also it improved my writing, because it's like every bit of writing is never wasted, and that's one thing that I learned. Maybe so
Astrid, you've done some courses at the Australian Writers Centre.
Yes, I have. I've done quite a few: Intro to Novel Writing, Creative Writing 1 and 2, Mystery, Murder and Magic, I believe was one as well. And they were all so fantastic, and I wouldn't be here if it weren't for those courses. So thank you so much.
Oh, we're so thrilled for you. I'm going to support you every step of the way because I absolutely believe in your writing and your novels. So very excited. What are you working on now?
Well, I have a few secret things that I can't talk about, unfortunately.
Oh my goodness. Can't you hint or something?
So as I've mentioned, there's been a lot of requests for sequels. So there is some things in the works. I can say that I do know what happens next in League of Liars. So that might be interesting to some people who have read the book. And I have a new book that I'm working on that I'm hoping to sell later in the year.
A standalone book.
Yes, this one is a standalone, but YA and blending of genres, all the fun stuff that I enjoy.
And how far into it are you?
I have, so this actually is one of the manuscripts I put aside. So I have 50,000 words, and I've come back to it, and I have fresh eyes, and I was like, why did I put this aside? I really enjoy this book. Let's finish it. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Brilliant. All right. And finally, what are your top 3 tips for aspiring writers who hope to be in a position like you are one day?
Well, my first is always read. The best way to learn how story structure can work, character arcs, is to read. The other thing is to know when to give up and move on to a new story.
Okay, yes.
But on the flip side, be persistent, because it is all about, you hear the only difference between a published author and unpublished is that they didn't give up. So
yes, absolutely. Brilliant advice. Congratulations once again on League of Liars. Everyone, you need to get a copy. It's absolutely such a great read. And we loved having you on the show. Thank you so much, Astrid.
Thank you so much, Valerie. It was a pleasure chatting to you.